figures that we see every day don't really matter.
Finding qualified workers for supply chain operations. Well, joining us to speak about that today is Steve Hopper, founding principal of the Stone Cross Group. Steve, welcome.
Thank you.
Steve, I know this doesn't come as a news flash, but we've been in some pretty dismal economic times for quite some time now. There's been an awful lot of unemployment. So I guess my question to you is, are we really having that much difficulty finding qualified workers for supply chain? And if that's true, why?
We really are. I deal with a lot of clients who run big warehouses and supply chain operations and really need good, skilled, qualified workers. And they tell me over and over again, it's just so difficult to get people who are interested in working and are qualified to fill those positions. And I think the reason is we have a gap. We have a gap between the people available to do work who maybe are unskilled and uninterested potentially in doing supply chain jobs, and those needs of skilled laborers.
You know, it's interesting you just mentioned gap, because I know you talk about a labor gap as opposed to a labor shortage. Why do you say that? What's the difference there? Walk us through that.
Well, the unemployment figures that we see every day don't really match up the positions available with the labor pool available to do that work. So from what I've seen, there are plenty of people around that could potentially do work but are not skilled, don't have the skills to do the work in a distribution center, in a manufacturing operation. The laborers that are available tend to be unskilled, or else they have potentially issues that prevent them from doing the job at hand.
Is that the same thing as the labor paradox that you talk about, or is that something different?
Something different. Very often when I speak about labor issues and conferences and so forth, I'll ask my audience, how many of you have children? And very often the hands in the room, most of the hands go up. But then I ask them, keep your hands in the air if you'd like your son or daughter to work in a warehouse someday. And all the hands come down. I think there's a stigma associated with blue-collar work, and unfortunately that is driving people away from the jobs in supply chain that potentially could be good careers in supply chain, but for whatever reason their parents are forcing them into white-collar type positions that they may not be suitable for.
You know, I think we're getting to something pretty important here. You know, if there isn't sufficient number of folks and traditional sources, you know, to fill these positions, which other demographics do you think might be a reliable source for the kind of workers that we need to fill these supply chain operation positions that we're talking about? What would they be?
That's a great question. There are really fundamentally three groups. I'm sure there would be more groups, but three fundamental groups of people. Number one is we have an aging population, the baby boomers, that are, many of which are eager to work, many of which have skills that would allow them to do work, but because of certain attributes of doing the job in a warehouse environment, certain physical attributes that would either require standing or walking long distances, prevent them from being able to do the work. Another group of folks like that, similar, would be the disabled community. Folks that really are eager to work and intelligent, so forth, but their disabilities would prevent them. And then thirdly, because of the cultural and language gap that's growing, we have a global economy, we have multiple cultures working together, and there are many people of other languages and other cultures that could be great workers, but they stumble over that language barrier.
Can we find a way to tap into those demographics? Is that something that's just insuperable, or is it something that we can work with and make work for us?
Absolutely. Looking at the disabled demographic as an example, Walgreens is a great case in point of a company that has made an initiative to accommodate those folks. Similarly, Lowe's and Toys R Us, companies like that are doing the same thing. In the aging population, one of my clients told me that their best workers are their senior workers, and they're not capable generally of the moving around long distances in the warehouse without help, but some of them use bicycles or the big tricycles. They give them sit-down jobs, processing things like jewelry, in a retailer processing things like jewelry, things that they can work at a table and not have to move around. And then thirdly, in the language barrier, I was in a distribution center several months ago where there were over 1,000 workers, and only 15% of them had English as their first language. but they were taking advantage of the other language. Mandarin Chinese, incidentally, was the #1 language. And by their training program, by putting multi-language signage and so forth, they've really done a nice job of accommodating those people.
Now, you know, in addition to tapping into these particular sources that you just mentioned, there must be some other areas that that companies can avail themselves of, other demographics, if you will, that they can exploit to fill these positions. Now, what would they be?
Well, really, when you're looking at a labor gap, the challenge is to match up the work that is needed to be done with those available to do the work. So beyond the accommodation factor, helping some of these demographics get those positions, obviously making people more productive at their jobs will help. You need fewer people to accomplish the same work. Automation is fairly obvious. Automation is a great way to increase productivity per worker in an operation. But similar to that, people can do, businesses can do many things just by putting in good performance management programs with their workers. Really designing the work well, giving workers the tools to be very productive in their jobs, and then giving them positive reinforcement for the jobs they do through incentives, programs like that, to be able to get the best performance out of the people that they have.
Well, you know, let's, I want to piggyback on that and develop that. You mentioned automation. Automation, though, can be fairly expensive. So I'm just wondering if there are other ways that we can match the available labor pool with the existing labor needs that we have, something other than automation. What do you say?
Sure. Well, these types of programs, performance management programs, really are the key to that. Very often businesses, the first thing they look at when they want to increase productivity is automation. And I am a big fan of automation, don't get me wrong, but it can be expensive, it can be risky, and very often there's low-hanging fruit, that there are ways to improve the performance and the productivity of people that are working in the facility, so that without investing in these big capital projects, by rolling out a culture of performance, can really drive up productivity. I mean, I say typically in an operation where there are no performance management programs, without changing anything in the physical operation, very often you can improve productivity 10 to 20% by implementing these types of programs.
Sounds to me that what we're talking about is benefiting a substantial portion of the population, and of course the enterprise itself benefiting by tapping these sources.
Absolutely.
Steve, I know you're busy here, but you found time to sit down and meet with us. I want to thank you very much for that. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, that's Steve Hopper, the Stonecross Group, speaking with us today about finding qualified workers for supply chain operations. Thank you for watching.